Hey guys, welcome back to the program. Jim Remley here. I'm with Joe Brady today. Joe has got an incredibly deep background in the commercial real estate world at the highest levels, and so we are very fortunate to have him on the program and give us some education on what we can expect on the commercial side and how it impacts us in the residential field. So, Joe, welcome.
Jim, thank you. It's great to be here.
It's absolutely my pleasure to have you here. So just so people can kind of get to know who you are, tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure. Yes, I've been in the commercial real estate space for about 35 years. It doesn't seem that long, but I did the math recently. And uh, and at this point, I've literally sat at every seat in the table, at the table, from being an advisor to a broker to a developer, to actually being the occupier. And I think most germane is that I was the head of real estate for Walgreens.
Huge.
Uh, yeah, that we had over 9,000 stores.
Wow.
While I was there, we did the biggest retail integration ever. It was 1,926 Rite Aid stores into Walgreens.
Wow.
So 150 million square feet, and everything about that experience was the law of big numbers. Whether it was how much rent does Walgreens pay a year, the answer is $4 billion, to how much it spent. So I really I got to see an awful lot of the country, and so that experience was wonderful. But right before the pandemic, I left Walgreens and I joined a company called the Instant Group, which is the Airbnb of flexible office space.
Interesting. Okay.
And I did quite a bit of office work while I was at Walgreens. I wound up engineering a 200,000 square foot lease in Chicago in the old post office for
Wow.
Walgreens to create the workplace of the future. So I decided to go to the Instant Group thinking, hey, this flexible office stuff sounds like it's interesting.
Yeah.
And by the way, that was December of
I was
2019.
going to say your timing couldn't be better, right?
Well, yeah, blind squirrel finds nut. And so the pandemic happens, and the corporate decision makers were just basically doing this. They really had no idea where to go.
Right.
And so the idea of having an outlet valve to go to a flexible structure was very attractive. So we wound up scaling the Instant Group in the Americas, both North and South America, by about 4x
Wow.
through the pandemic.
Wow.
Yeah. So and all the while, Jim, I was looking at what was happening in office. I was reading the headlines, death of the office,
Yeah.
and the whole industry is going to collapse. The same clickbait that I read 20 years, 15 years ago about the retail industry. So
Right.
it struck me that I've seen this movie before, and there's really a common denominator, and there are some tremendous lessons that could be learned from the retail industry that will help the office sector navigate what's coming down the line in the next couple of years.
Well, it does apply to, every small town, every middle-sized town, every big town. There's a mix. You have to have a mix of retail, residential, and office space to make the community work, right? Just to have a functioning community. And so it's definitely all kind of tied together and tethered together. It also creates jobs and commerce and everything else, tax revenue. So it's all part of a big puzzle that we have to put together. So I'm interested to hear your take on it with because we hear it all the time. You're right. There's a lot of like the sky's falling, the whole office structure is collapsing, and there's going to be tons of buildings coming up. We got interest rates resetting on all this commercial investments. What's your take on all that stuff? I'm very curious.
Yes, well, my initial take is that the common thinking is way too reductive, meaning everyone wants the silver bullet,
Right.
right? Jim, give me the answer. People come to your podcast because they want that symbol of
A
the
magic wand.
right? It's just has a bow on top of it, and that's the answer.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's more complicated than that, and many retailers found out that it could be existential, right? There's many brands that have disappeared. There's many what we call C level malls that don't exist anymore. They've been bulldozed. Now they're
Yeah.
multifamily. There have been B level malls that have been somewhat dismantled and reassembled. But I will tell you the A malls and the A retailers have continued to do well because
Interesting.
they're relevant.
Yeah.
And why are they relevant? It's because they've understood that the consumer has the keys. The consumer primacy wave happened in retail, where she, and at Walgreens we always refer to the consumer as she. So I'll use that if you don't mind. I
No,
don't
yeah.
want to.
Leave it. Yeah.
Yeah, they decide to vote with their wallet, and where are they going to go? Well, all of this is wrapped into this acceleration in technology, right? Because there was a time not that long ago where shop was literally a noun. It was a place people went to spend money.
Right.
Now, while you were in the four walls, you were shopping, but technology allowed us to, grabbing my iPhone, right? Now that we have the technology in our hand that allows us to shop anywhere, anytime. But
Yeah.
it's not just shopping. The consumer has also decided that they want a say, right? They want to be able to rate a particular item. They want to read and get feedback. And I want to hear what Jim has to say about this item before I buy this snowboard or pair of skis, because you're an expert at it. Or if not, I respect what your opinion is. So all of a sudden so you have technology, you have communication and interaction, and then you have purpose. And what we've seen in really successful retailers is this notion of purpose or mission. And I'll throw out a couple of brands,
Sure.
not the least of which is Apple,
Yeah.
right? So we all buy in, most of us buy in.
Yeah.
Lululemon is another great example where it's not just a place to buy yoga clothes, it's a place where you want to identify with and spend time in, and go to do a yoga class, or walk around to make sure people know that you're wearing Lulu and therefore you're a vital member of society.
My
Right?
wife can't go past a Lululemon store, I'll tell you that.
They have good men's stuff too, I'll tell you.
That's true.
So where is all this going? The successful and relevant retailers have realized the consumer has the keys. They're in charge. They've continued to adapt and evolve. And what hasn't happened on the office side is a recognition that employees are the new consumers.
Interesting.
And so my thesis is work, not too long ago, was completely coupled with office. Where are you
Yeah.
going, Jim? I'm going to work, which meant you were going to an office,
Yeah.
typically. Since the pandemic, office and work are now decoupled, and work is moving into becoming a verb that many people think working is a verb, but work is now a thing we do irrespective of place. Now, that doesn't mean the office is dead.
No.
But it does mean there's a rise of flexible office space and other third places where people can work. But let's go back to the conversation around what makes a really, really important retailer and a relevant retailer. And that is the ability to communicate and interact.
Mhm.
And the notion that there's purpose and a mission. There are a lot of companies out there right now saying, return to the office.
Yeah.
And the consumers are saying, why?
Hmm.
They're not, is it return to the office because you say so? Well, that's antithetical to this notion that the best companies in the world hire adults, but then you treat us like children.
Right.
That
Right.
doesn't feel good.
Hmm.
Or are you dragging people back just so that you can have warm cohesion and culture and everyone's getting together? Believe me, I love being with my teams. I love the interaction.
Hmm.
I was just in the Bay Area this week at our office in Walnut Creek and got to meet some new people, and ideas were flying. But leaders have to ask themselves, do you need to be in an office 5 days a week, 9 to 5, in order to achieve that? And
Right.
there's this fallacy that the industrial era construct of having people work in a factory Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, is the best way to foster the collaboration and communication and culture. But let me tell you, if you want to erode trust and culture, one of the best things you could do is mandate a return to office.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I agree with you. It's interesting as my son is a software engineer, works for a company in Portland, Oregon. And of course, during COVID, everybody was working from home. And software engineers by nature can work at home. I mean, they're just programming, right?
Right.
But the company is now saying we want to pull you back in. We want you to come back to the office. Um, but yeah, there's definitely a pushback there. There's like, hey, we've gotten used to this. We're just as productive as we were before. But I can see there's the kind of the writing on the wall. There's probably some version of a hybrid model, partly coming to the office, partly working from home. But you don't need as much space. Your footprint probably for your overall office can be smaller, so it's more flexible. So I can see all of this you're talking about. It's very relevant. Absolutely.
Yeah, and the healthy ecosystems that you referenced earlier, Jim, are vitally important, where you have the village mentality, the live, work, play, you're shopping in that same community. Literally in the past week, in addition to San Francisco, I was in LA and I was in Chicago. And I lived in Chicago for 30 years and know it and love it. And I was happy to report, I'm happy to report that Chicago is more vibrant today or this past week than I've seen it in a long time.
Wow.
But the Loop, for your listeners, the downtown area, central business district is generally referred to as the Loop. It's still largely a monoculture, meaning it's work.
Yeah.
And so nature abhors monocultures, right?
Mhm.
If you try to plant the same crop over and over again, bad things happen.
Right.
And likewise, if you just have one of those components, the work component, without the live and the play, you're seeing cities that are experiencing a lot of pain.
Hmm.
And there's a phenomenon that's emerged, something called an urban doom loop, where what you have is this reduction in tax base. The reduction in the tax base comes because, I'll use Chicago again. If you had people coming from the suburbs or living in other parts of the city and going to the downtown, the central business district, on average, you'd have 4.5 days a week of daytime population. And so places like my former employer, Walgreens, can do well, and
Yeah.
food and beverage, and
Services. Yeah.
your national or your local mom and pop. You can make a business out of that. It's hard, but you can.
Yeah.
And what we've seen in terms of patterns and behavior after the pandemic is that 4.5 days is now down to maybe 2.5 days.
Interesting. Yes.
So businesses close, the food and beverage and the support and services close, revenue goes down. The cities, the municipalities have a decision to make. Do we raise taxes on whoever's left, i.e. Chicago,
Hmm.
or do you start cutting city services, at which point none of those options are very good? And so we're really watching very closely what's happening in these cities. There's some good news though, and I'll use Chicago again as an example. But 2 miles away to the west is an area called Fulton Market. And I refer to that as a better business district, a BBD, not a CBD.
Yeah.
And the reason why is it has that healthy ecosystem component. It was always sort of the cool, hip area that had warehouses that were converted to lofts. So the residential led the way.
Yeah.
Of course, the restaurants and the art galleries and the bars followed. And then Google happened.
Mm.
Google came in and was the first business to sign a lease in the Fulton Market area. And lo and behold, a bunch of other tech followed. And McDonald's actually moved their world headquarters from
Wow.
Oak Brook in the suburbs to the Fulton Market. Now, is it perfect today? No, but it's a lot better than the Loop. And
Yeah.
so those healthy ecosystems are really vital. Uh, but what's interesting is, and I'm sure many of your listeners have experienced this, I hope, is that for those working folks that typically would have gone downtown or to a central business district, they're actually now working from home or working near home. And
Mhm.
so we've seen, obviously, housing prices have lifted despite interest rates, and we know the retail asset class, particularly suburban grocery anchored shopping centers, have really gone through the roof. They've been very, very successful, very, very strong, and you know, and now many investors, myself included, are looking at it and developing or investing in suburban daily needs grocery anchored centers.
Interesting. And I think that brings me to the question is from your perspective, when you're looking at that exact sounds like great investment, those properties, is it because they're close to home? And because the center of our universe is now home, and I think that was a big part of the pandemic and the rise in real estate prices is suddenly the home is the center. I work from home, I live at home, my kids are home, is because the closer the proximity to home that these small strip malls where you might have a grocery store and some restaurants scattered in, is that the success? Is that's what's driving the success of them? Rather than when it used to be, it was an event. We're gonna go to the mall, we're gonna go to the office. It's a whole different thing, right?
I have a different take on that,
Yeah,
Jim.
I'd love to hear it. Yeah.
And I would hear repeatedly people before the pandemic try to struggle for a work-life balance,
Right.
the ever elusive work-life balance, right?
Right.
And what I think has emerged post-pandemic is now the pursuit of a life-work balance.
Interesting.
And what we're seeing with the hybrid work environment is more working women, more working mothers can get back into the workforce, or
Mhm.
mothers can get back into the workforce. Women have always been at a disadvantage, right, wrong, or indifferent. They've always been the primary caregiver for children. Um, we're all living longer, thank God, which is
Yeah.
great. My parents are in their late 80s; they're doing well. Thank goodness. My father-in-law not so well,
Mhm.
and so we get to spend time with him during the day. And he lives not too far from us now here in Florida, in Jacksonville. But I do think there's a life work balance revolution that's happening because people realize we're not factory workers. In
Right.
fact, we're in this new collar economy, right? It's not blue, it's not white, it's sort of a new collar economy. That concept was coined by Ginny Rometty, who's the former CEO from IBM, and IBM really saw the future and continues to see the future as far as where work will come from and how we can use knowledge to propel what it is that we're doing, regardless of the industry you're in. And so there was a really interesting article in the New York Times about a little less than a year ago called The Afternoon Economy.
Hmm.
And it talked about how post-pandemic, the working folks in New York we're spending a lot of time and a lot of money in the afternoons with personal pursuits,
Hmm.
whether it was hitting golf balls, getting a massage, getting your nails done, going
Interesting.
to museums. And they brought up this really interesting concept. And Nick Bloom, who's a economist from Stanford, has been one of the foremost thinkers on work from home for over 20 years. And pandemic happened, and now he's in the forefront, which is
Yeah.
great. Listening to and reading what Nick has to say is terrific. But he talked about this whole idea of it's almost back to school, right? So when we were in college, we'd go to classes during the day, and in the afternoon, we would either engage in intramurals, or if you played a varsity sport, or if you did something else, you'd have dinner, you'd go to then you'd have dinner, and then what would you do? And I just spit that out, which is you go to the library for a couple of 2, 3 hours and work at night. And that is a very similar pattern that we're seeing in this new collar economy.
Hmm.
Because ultimately, if the outcome of your work are either ideas, or for your son, it's a coding project, or whatever. And if you're the leader of that team, do you really care uh, where and when these products emerge, these ideas emerge, the work emerges? Now, you have to have cohesion, you have to have connectivity. The company has to have mission and values, because people don't work for paychecks, right? They work for leaders.
Yeah.
These are all really, really important things. And so I just think that we're coming back, that there's this opportunity for us to have life and work balance, and still be effective, meaning the work product, that which we do, is accretive to the company that we're working for. I think there's a fallacy around productivity, right? If
Yeah.
Jim, you're my boss, and I called you up and said, hey Jim, I sent out 100 emails today, right?
Right.
So what, right? Were they good emails, or did they
Yeah.
write?
What's the result?
Right.
Yeah.
So if I called you up and said, I just played 9 holes and I sent 5 emails and 2 were responded and I have 1 deal, right? You
Yeah.
kind of forget that I played golf, even though I'm
Right.
terrible at it.
Right. I do think that that's interesting. It's a more of a results orient, or should be becoming more of a results oriented economy, where we don't care as much how you get it done as long as you get it done, which is also, it leads me to another question for you, which is I think is really interesting too, is there's a big hype now. The next hype is AI, right? And how will AI change really everything when it comes to again, work being replaced, or having less office space needed, or even, changing, the dynamics of a warehouse where you have warehouse workers and that whole kind of concept. Have you guys looked at that in your industry? Have you thought about that? Is that something you guys are considering?
Well, looking at it very closely,
Yeah.
and I'm looking at it as one of the most important platform shifts that we've seen happen. But it's not the last one. Certainly, it's not the last one, and there's a couple of others that are really nipping at its heels. But I would say that generative AI is uh, has the ability to create higher productivity that should lead to better effectiveness, right?
Yeah.
Generative AI is a force multiplier,
Right.
meaning if you and I, Jim, were to go out in the front yard and dig a hole with 2 shovels, it would take us, if we were going to dig 5 feet down, it would take us, probably 4 hours, right?
Yeah.
We'd be sweating a lot, and we'd probably need a cold adult beverage at the end.
For sure.
Generative AI to me is like a steam shovel that just comes in and with one fell swoop digs that hole, and we're done. And
Yeah.
then we have more time to drink adult beverages. So, um, uh, and people have to realize how that's going to factor into their lives. I'll give you a really, really good example. When I was at Walgreens, a hurricane came through South Texas. Walgreens had about 100 stores that were impacted.
Wow.
I needed to know from the lease, from all of the leases, what the company's exposure was in terms of rebuilding, what responsibilities did the landlord have, insurance,
Yeah.
and so forth. It literally took 8 humans,
Wow.
2 full weeks, Jim, to
Go through every lease.
read and review every physical lease,
Mm.
right? I
Hmm.
mean, if you do the 8 humans times 8 hours a day, 2 weeks, $25 an hour, just throw some meatball math at it. it costs $16,000 to get that answer.
Jeez. Right.
Generative AI will produce that same answer in 17 seconds and really at no cost.
Yeah. With no errors. Right.
Well, that possibly that
Yeah.
there's a whole, like, we could have a whole nother hour talking about data governance, and it's,
Right.
stuff in equals stuff out. But there's a high degree of probability that it's exactly what we need, or it's close enough.
Right.
So then what? So the question then is, what could those 8 people do if they actually got those 2 weeks back, and
Right.
they could actually go and be more effective elsewhere?
Yeah.
So uh, will Gen AI replace jobs? Absolutely.
Mhm.
Will Gen AI create more uh, more jobs that are actually higher paying and more meaningful? The answer is absolutely yes. We've seen it every single platform shift. We've seen this phenomenon happen.
Mhm.
And by the way, the same naysayers are screaming, they're going to take our jobs. The technological overlords are taking over, right?
Yeah.
And the question is not, are you going to lose your job? It is, well, if you lose your job, what are you going to replace it with
Right.
that will be even better for you?
Yeah.
And by the way, in 1900 in New York City, can you guess how many people were employed shoveling horse manure?
I can't even imagine. 100? It's probably way more than that. How many?
There were literally 30,000 people
Oh
whose
my
job it
gosh.
was
Oh
to
my
shovel,
gosh. Unbelievable.
right?
Yeah.
But then the horseless carriage came along, and those people all lost their jobs because there was no more, well, limited horse poop to shovel. But then where did they go? They got jobs on the line building cars
Right.
that were higher paying and more advanced, and then on and on and on. So I just think it's important to look at the history and watch patterns to see where things are going next. Part of the problem, though, is change is happening so fast.
Hmm.
Even in the market value of Nvidia went from 2 trillion to $3 trillion in 4 months.
That's crazy.
It's nuts to think about how fast all of that is evolving. So
Interesting. You said you wrote a book, and I want all the listeners to be able to go out and get that book and find just kind of continue the conversation. I think it's good.
well, I appreciate that. Yeah,
Yeah.
the book is called, this is the shameless plug part of
Yeah, let's do it.
the book is called Workshop,
Okay.
and it's the consumer driven transformation of commercial real estate. So I talk a lot about sort of the history of work, the history of technology, how it comes in. Also, a lot of the history and the reality today of what's happening in retail, and then what there are some tools and tips and tricks to think about. I don't have many answers in the book, but hopefully it will make you ask more questions in different areas, right?
Yeah.
So whether it's, I think in the residential side, design has always been vitally important, and community gathering in kitchens. Every house my wife and I ever lived in, she's redone the kitchen. It's been magnificent. Uh, right. And we're seeing this crossover into office design, even using a term that I never heard of called resi-mercial,
Hmm.
where you have vignettes, right? You just don't, the cubicle farm is dead.
Right.
Now you have these different areas where people can choose to work. The smart companies are measuring and observing where people are working,
Mhm.
and they're switching out places that have no interest, that aren't relevant, and replacing them with those that are. So it's not to be hokey and say beanbags, but it's everything from conference rooms with comfortable chairs. So there may be where we need to have a serious conversation or a fun conversation, or just a myriad of different types of spaces for people to test and work with. And the big thing that I come back to, particularly in the book, is the ribbon cutting is not the end of the process. And in the office real estate, it's the ribbon's cut, job done, we're done and dusted, let's go. That's actually the beginning of the process.
Right, right.
That's something that people in the office asset sector don't fully internalize. So yeah, I set up a little website, joebrady.ai. You can download a piece of the book there, and there's links to Amazon and other locations. So I appreciate you letting me mention that.
Well, absolutely. It's been absolutely fascinating talking to you about this, topic we don't often talk about in the residential sector, but it definitely has an impact on all of our lives. So, Joe, thank you for being on the show. We really appreciate all your knowledge and your expertise. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jim. Really enjoyed it.